Now that David and I were officially a couple, I decided it was cause for celebration. I had that glass of wine. Actually, I had a couple. Now, I didn't get wasted or obliterated or sloppy, but I definitely got tipsy, maybe a little rambunctious. After all, I really hadn't drank in almost a year. So I think I may have told him that I loved him, but he didn't say it back. Later on in the night, somebody quoted a TV show where a character says, "I love you" in a Scottish accent. So I did my best impression of that character and I yelled out, "I love you," like I was just being silly at the party. But I did this at the top of my lungs, and as I did this, I accidentally made eye contact with David while I was doing this. He looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. He looked terrified, so scared. I tried to explain to him that I was quoting a character from a TV show, but the party was very loud, and I think it fell on deaf ears. Still, I didn't think too much of it. I made a mental note not to say it again unless if he did first, and I spent the rest of the night sitting on David's lap. And my friend Laura would come up to us drunk and being like, "You have the most awesome, sexy girlfriend," to David. I was having the best time, and I know Laura was really excited for me that David and I had just become a couple. Unfortunately, I don't think David was having as good of a time as I was, but I didn't pick up on it until later that night. I think the "I love you" comment hit him over the head like a jackhammer and really freaked him out. That wasn't a conversation that he was ready to have. When we got back to my house, David said, I don't really like going to parties where I don't know anyone. I know it's not really normal." And he looked at me and I said, "I think that's very normal." But we didn't elaborate beyond that. And looking back, I believe that maybe he was setting me up for the fact that he wasn't really going to continue to come into my life and come hang out with my friends, I think. So David left my house the next morning and everything seemed okay in the morning, so I was really relieved. The following Monday, he called me from work and made plans to come over. He sounded upbeat. I was so excited to see him, as it would be the first time we'd be getting together as a couple. I just couldn't wait. I thought maybe we'd go on some really cool date or stay in, but either way, I was so excited. It just being our first official couple hangout together. When he came over, I was expecting a nice hug or a kiss hello, and instead he just sat in the corner of my bedroom, eyes on the floor, and very withdrawn. We made some pleasant but awkward conversation. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't brave enough to ask what it was. I would later learn that he had snapped out of the bubble love phase while I was still very much in it. Also, at this point in my life, I didn't have very good communication skills or boundaries, and I was a little avoidant in nature, and I believe he was too. But it was almost as if David had a twin brother who was much less animated and just not that into me. When I brought up the wedding he had invited me to, he looked very uncomfortable. I brought it up a couple of times that week. So what I did was I ended up rehearsing with my band the night of the wedding. So when they asked me to rehearse, I said yes. And I told David that I couldn't go to the wedding. David looked so relieved when I told him that. I wasn't upset, mad. I wasn't nervous about this change of pace, to be honest. I was just very confused. I was bummed out, but it didn't make sense. How could someone who was so into me now feel like this indifferent? And this was the days before we had all this information on YouTube that could kind of decode and explain this behavior. I didn't know that this type of switch up or pullback was actually a common thing that happened with men. And usually it happened when they either completely lost interest, when they get scared, or if they needed a minute to regroup. Now, looking back, I realized that it would have been better to just talk about it and ask him what was going on, or maybe just end the relationship or take a break from it. But I didn't know these things at that time. I was still figuring it out. So yeah, David was entering his runner stage. Only he didn't run physically at first. He ran emotionally. I know with twin flames, they usually talk about them running where there's no communication, but it is also possible for a twin flame to just run kind of in spirit and still be there. And we did this for almost a year. So technically, we were in a relationship. He called me his girlfriend. He did call me every day from work, but we rarely went on dates. We did go on them, but not like we did in the beginning. And on the weekends, we often didn't hang out, or sometimes he'd say he'd call me and then he wouldn't. And at that time, I was just confused as to why he was acting this way. But also, I didn't have the ability to address it. I just didn't have that skill set. It was still pleasant when we saw each other. We got along very well. We never fought. We joked around. But the David that I knew, the one that made me feel so desirable, the David that I went on adventures with, that David was gone. Looking back, I think our official relationship may have been just one long and drawn out breadcrumbing phase, but I didn't know about breadcrumbing back then. Maybe I was supposed to pick up on it and pick up on the fact that there was a slow fade, and maybe I was supposed to be the one to end it, but I never did. And I believe the reason why I was able to hang out in this type of situation was because I hadn't been looking for anything serious. I actually had been looking for something kind of part-time at the time. And I wasn't ready to lose David. I really liked him. And as I said, I didn't have great boundaries or communication skills at that time. And maybe that's what David was supposed to teach me about. Eventually, David broke up with me when we had been in a relationship for almost a year. I made the mistake of asking him why. And he looked at me with very sad eyes and said, "I'm not in love." And I was pretty shocked. I never thought I'd hear him say that to me. And he told me he still wanted me in his life. And I told him, I couldn't see him for a while. And then he said, "I'm going to go." And then he turned around and walked out of my apartment and out of my life.